Picture this, 24 BCE, the Roman Empire. The most powerful military machine the world had ever seen is at the height of its power. After conquering Egypt, they turned their gaze south, expecting another easy victory, another territory to add to their sprawling domain. They march into the lands of Nubia, in modern-day Sudan, anticipating little resistance. What they found instead was a nightmare. They found Kandake Amanirenas, one-eyed African warrior queen, who would hand the invincible Roman legions not one, not two, but 3 humiliating defeats. This is the story of the woman who stared down an emperor and won. To understand how this happened, you have to understand where she came from. Amanirenas wasn't just some local chieftain. She was the absolute ruler of the Kingdom of Kush, a civilization centered in the city of Meru, and Kush was no fledgling state. By the time Rome showed up, the Kushite kingdom had already existed for over 2,000 years. This was an ancient, powerful, and incredibly advanced civilization. They weren't living in the shadow of Egypt. For a time they were Egypt, the 25th dynasty of pharaohs. The so-called Black Pharaohs were Kushite kings who conquered and ruled all of Egypt for nearly a century. The Kushites were master architects, building more than 200 pyramids across their lands. In fact, there are more pyramids in Sudan today than in all of Egypt. They were also pioneers of industry. Meru was a massive center for iron production, with slag heaps so vast they are still visible today. Their iron weapons were technologically superior to many of their neighbors, and their leadership structure was unique. The title Kandake, often translated as Candace, wasn't a ceremonial role for a queen consort. The Kandakes were queens regnant, military commanders, and the ultimate political and religious authority. They ruled in their own right, often alongside their sons, but their power was absolute. When a Kandake spoke, it was law. When she led an army, warriors followed. Amanirenas was one of the most formidable in a long line of these powerful women. The Stage 4 conflict was set in 30 BCE, when Rome, under the future Emperor Augustus, annexed Egypt. Suddenly, the Kushite kingdom shared a border with the most aggressive, expansionist empire on the planet. The new Roman governor of Egypt, alias Gallus, was soon preoccupied with a disastrous campaign in Arabia. But in his absence, he left behind a man named Gaius Petronius. Petronius, embodying Roman arrogance, saw the wealthy kingdom to the south as low-hanging fruit. He demanded that Amanirenas and the Kushite people pay tribute to Emperor Augustus. This was the standard Roman operating procedure: submit and pay, or be crushed. For Rome, it was an offer. For Amanirenas, it was an insult. She refused. Point blank, this wasn't just a political statement. It was a declaration of war. In 27 BCE, while Petronius was still distracted, Amanirenas made the first move. She didn't wait for the Romans to invade. She took the fight to them. Leading a force of 30,000 Kushite warriors, she marched north into Roman-controlled Egypt. Her army stormed through the southern territories, overwhelming the Roman garrisons at Syene, Elephantine, and Philae. They weren't just raiding, they were conquering. They took Roman soldiers captive and asserted their dominance in a way that was both strategic and deeply symbolic. During these raids, Kushite soldiers captured several bronze statues of Emperor Augustus. In a calculated act of defiance, they decapitated the statues. The bodies were likely melted down, but one head was taken all the way back to Meru. There, it was buried beneath the steps of a grand temple dedicated to victory. The message was unmistakable. Every person entering the temple, every priest, every noble, every warrior would symbolically walk over the face of the Roman emperor. It was the ultimate display of contempt, a daily reminder that the ruler of Rome was beneath the feet of the Kushite people. Augustus, who styled himself a living god, was being trodden into the dirt. When news of this reached Rome, the response was swift and brutal. Gaius Petronius, now back in Egypt, was enraged. This was a direct assault on the majesty of the emperor and the authority of Rome. He gathered to full legions, around 10,000 elite, heavily armed soldiers, and marched south in 24 BCE, determined to teach the barbarians a lesson. Initially, the Roman machine did what it did best. Petronius recaptured the southern cities and pushed deep into Kushite territory. He met an unprepared Kushite army and defeated it, forcing them to retreat. He even managed to sack the city of Napata, an old Kushite capital. But Amanirenas was not defeated. She had simply regrouped. The queen had lost an eye in one of these early battles, becoming the one-eyed warrior history remembers was just getting started. She and her forces fell back to the main capital, Meru. Petronius pursued, but the further he marched into the desert, the more his situation deteriorated. Supply lines were stretched thin, the terrain was harsh and unfamiliar, and the Kushite resistance was relentless. Amanirenas employed guerrilla tactics, using her army's knowledge of the land to harass, ambush, and bleed the Roman legions. The iron-wielding Kushite soldiers were formidable opponents. Faced with a determined queen and an army fighting on its home turf, Petronius realized he could not take Meru. He couldn't win. So he retreated, leaving a garrison behind and heading back to Egypt, thinking he had pacified the region. He was wrong. Amanirenas saw the Roman withdrawal not as a victory for them, but as an opportunity for her. She gathered her forces once again and marched on the Roman garrison Petronius had left behind. In the ensuing clash, she annihilated them. This was her second major victory. She had repelled the invasion and destroyed the occupying force. Rome had sent its best, and they had failed. Now, it was Petronius's turn to panic. He braced for another Kushite invasion of Egypt, one he might not be able to stop. But the attack never came. Amanirenas was a brilliant strategist. She knew that a prolonged war, even one she was winning, would devastate her kingdom. So instead of launching another invasion, she sent ambassadors. Not to beg for mercy, but to negotiate a peace. These Kushite envoys traveled all the way to the Greek island of Samos, where Emperor Augustus himself was holding court. Imagine the scene. These African diplomats, representing a queen who had just trounced his legions, standing before the most powerful man in the world to discuss terms. According to the ancient historian Strabo, Augustus was so impressed by their audacity and courage that he listened. The negotiations that followed were stunning. The Kushite delegation laid out their case. Their queen had been provoked. Their lands had been invaded. They had defended themselves. Now, they wanted peace, but a peace between equals. After 3 years of brutal fighting, after being fought to a complete standstill, Rome agreed. The terms of the Treaty of Samos in 21 BCE were almost unprecedented. All Roman demands for tribute were dropped. The border was redrawn, giving a buffer zone back to the Kushites. Rome effectively incorporated all claims to Kushite territory. The Kushite kingdom would pay no tribute and no nitrogen monoxide allegiance to the Roman Empire. They had fought the global superpower to a draw and forced them to sign a peace treaty as equals. This simply did not happen. Rome conquered, it dominated, it subjugated. It did not negotiate with lesser kingdoms as peers, but with Queen Amanirenas, it did. So why isn't this story taught in every history class? Why is Amanirenas not as famous as Cleopatra or Boudica? Because her story demolishes the comfortable, Eurocentric narratives that have dominated history for centuries. It challenges the myth of Roman invincibility. It proves the existence of powerful, highly advanced African civilizations capable of standing up to any power on Earth. And it showcases the reality of female leadership and military command in the ancient world, something often dismissed as an anomaly. For a long time, European historians dismissed the classical accounts of this war as exaggerated, a tall tale. They couldn't accept that an African kingdom could have possibly achieved this. But then came archaeology. In 1910, British archaeologist John Garstang was excavating the ruins of Meru, and there, buried right where the ancient sources said it would be, under the steps of a temple, he found it. The bronze head of Emperor Augustus. The Meru head is now one of the most famous artifacts in the British Museum, a tangible piece of proof validating the entire story. Amanirenas was real. Her victory was real. By facing down Rome, Queen Amanirenas secured her kingdom's independence for another 300 years. She saved her people from Roman rule and ensured that the Kushite civilization would continue to thrive. Today, she is remembered as a national hero in Sudan. Her image appears on currency, and her legacy is celebrated as a foundational story of resistance and strength. She is a symbol of a nation that would not bow. A one-eyed African queen defeated the Roman Empire and forced them to negotiate peace. Then history tried to forget her. But we remember, and now you know. If you want more untold stories of African power, hit subscribe. New videos 3 times a week. Next, we're exploring another African achievement that changed the world.